What better way to start off the international break than talking about Manchester City's downfall? For the first time in a long time since Pep made the Premier League a farmers league, we can finally say that Manchester City are really looking like they're on a downward spiral. And if this keeps going for the rest of the season, the league will be wide open for anyone to win. United. In case you missed it somehow, Pep Guardiola with Manchester City are going into this international break having lost 4 games in a row, which coincidentally is the first time this has happened in Pep Guardiola's long, bald career. So now this has been raising a ton of questions because we're all trying to figure out the same thing. What the heck is going on at Manchester City? I mean, this is a City side that without a shadow of a doubt has been the most dominant side in the Premier League. A side that's led by the manager who many people believe is the best manager of all time and also the most adaptive manager of all time. I mean, yeah, the last handful of campaigns, they were starting off pretty slow, but by this point we're typically starting to show signs of improvement going into that kind of winter period. We're not really seeing that this year. I guess there's one thing we need to keep in mind with the City team, and it's something that we've discussed on the channel before, but it's the fact that they've lost Rodri due to injury pretty early on in the season, which means they've been without not only their best and most important player, but also the best player in world football at this very moment, allegedly. And so you pair this up with a couple of other factors that are kind of going on at the club, and all of these things start to add up. And of course, boys, real quick, new to the channel, don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe. We're dropping weekly football videos, so don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss an upload. And if you're not new to the channel, boys, welcome back. Glad to have you around for another video. With that being said, boys, let's get into a couple of reasons why City might be struggling. I do also want to preface that I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that City are just absolutely done in this season and they have no chance at all, because there is still about 27-26 games to go for the rest of the season. So who's to say they don't just go undefeated from here on out? But it's definitely not looking good for them at this very moment. First things first, it goes without saying that Manchester City have been absolutely riddled with injuries this season. And you might be thinking to yourself,
all teams go through injuries. That's no excuse to play terrible.
Shut up, because you know that's just not how it works. Every single team that faces significant injuries to key players is always gonna be worse than when they have a full strength starting 11, or even just stronger than when they have maybe 1 or 2 players out. That's just how it works. For example, look at Liverpool after they won their first Premier League ever. The next season, their back line was riddled with injuries, they had a couple of other key players out, and they played significantly worse. And now the same thing's happening in the City, and it's been going on pretty much since the summer. In August, they saw players like Haaland, Ederson, Rico Lewis, Grealish, Gundogan, Rodri, Savinho, Kovacic, and Foden all be put into doubt either due to potential injuries or a lack of fitness, because also some of these guys were coming back from the Euros, from Copa America. There was just that lack of fitness and all those minor injuries that kind of pile up for players as you know, you're playing a ton of games. But it would be more in the September and the October months where things really kicked into overdrive at City. This is when the football gods began to punish them for their crimes before the actual Premier League gets to them. So in September, City will lose their 2 most important players in De Bruyne and Rodri. With De Bruyne, City were losing the man behind every great attack that City was able to produce. De Bruyne really needs no introduction, but the fact that City was losing their player who could pick up the ball and either drive at defenses or play an incisive pass that just cuts to the opposition was a massive loss. On top of that, De Bruyne's really the only player on the side that actively seeks out Erling Haaland. With a striker like Haaland, who's probably the best number 9 when it comes to poaching and being in the box, getting opportunities off, and scoring goals as we saw at the beginning of this season, you need players that are going to consistently seek to find him every single possession. And for Manchester City, De Bruyne is really the only guy that does that. If you watch any of their other players, they tend to pass back, they tend to pass sideways, whereas De Bruyne, it feels like he's just constantly looking for Haaland to make that run, and he's gonna make that pass regardless of if it finds Haaland or not. So it's no wonder that their scoring output has slowed down since De Bruyne has been out. And of course, as I mentioned, City have the other major injury in Rodri, who is by far their most important player. He's literally the man who makes everything tick at City, and we even saw him do it for Spain this past summer. The guy was insane. That's what won him the damn Ballon d'Or. A ball winner, elite passer, and even a clutch gene are all attributes that Rodri has displayed, which have been vital for City in these successful periods. A lot of people when Rodri won the Ballon d'Or, Vinicius agenda aside, felt that center defensive mids were finally getting the recognition that they deserved since Busquets was around. Ballon d'Or conversation aside, they're kind of right. Someone like Rodri is, as we're seeing now, incredibly vital to a team that has won so many trophies and has been so dominant. So without him, you can see visibly how City are struggling, because there's a massive hole in the midfield a lot of the times that other teams are just very easily exploiting and punishing City for. And then you pair those two injuries with the loss of John Stones and Ruben Dias, and you can see how City have a problem in the defensive sector. And we saw this when Sporting absolutely just steamrolled City in the Champions League. They took advantage of all their defensive frailties. And then you still have other pieces like Grealish, Oscar Bob, and Doku that are all out to injury, which just adds more fuel to the fire. So should the players on the pitch still be strong enough to beat the teams that they've lost against so far? 1000%. However, it could just be that a lot of the guys that are getting game time now because of all these other injuries are just not good enough, or realistically wouldn't be starting if City had a full strength team. Of course, stuff like that is all hypothetical, but the matter of fact is that City has been absolutely riddled with injury, and they haven't been able to cope with that, which kind of takes us to our next point. This time around, Manchester City have not really strengthened their team in the summer. Usually every year we hear that City has enough depth to create 2 starting 11s, and each team would compete for the league and be able to win the league. And this was usually due to how much they would spend in the transfer window. And this is the first time in a while where it really feels like that statement just does not hold any truth. Be it due to the impending trial for their 115 charges of financial fair play violations, or to the recent changes in regulations for how teams are able to spend. But this past summer, we did not see City splashing the cash. And having lost players like Laporte, Mahrez, Julian Alvarez, João Cancelo, and even Cole Palmer within the last 2 seasons, this past summer saw City bring in Savinho from Girona, which is part of the same sporting group as Manchester City, and then Gundogan on a free because his contract was up at Barcelona, so he had been making a return to the club that he was at just 2 years ago. And that's about it. So you can see how they're not really bringing in players to replace what's going out. And don't get me wrong, these are both good players, but Savinho is far from the finished product and hasn't necessarily taken the league a storm quite yet. And Gundogan, like I mentioned, just left the club 2 years ago and he's already back. Pep Guardiola never brings in free agents or nonetheless players that he just let go. So there's something up there. So long story short, there just isn't a lot of cover for this City side that I feel like is shedding too many quality players, which leaves them in the predicament that they're in today, specifically due to the injuries. So if we take a look at the last match against Brighton, City deployed Nunez, who was a center midfielder, on the left, Simpson Puse as the main center back of a back 3, Walker as a right center back, and an attacking midfield pair of Gundogan and Foden, which would have been sick 2 years ago, but just doesn't cut it at this very moment. Foden's been off this season, and like I said, Gundogan isn't quite the same player he was before. At the moment, this is the most bare bones the City side has felt. And granted, De Bruyne should be fully fit after this upcoming international break, and so should Ruben Dias and John Stones, which are all going to bring a lot of stability back to this side, especially the core of the team. But should any problems creep back up for City, let's say for example De Bruyne, he's a little bit older now, let's say he pulls his hamstring again or something goes wrong, then what? We're going to be in the same predicament we were in before. And because that also kind of brings us to our last point, which is the fact that Pep Guardiola, is he washed now? Because he's trying different things. He's approached these last 4 games all a little bit differently and nothing has worked. And if you saw City lost 4 games in a row, you would think to yourself maybe that they just played against, Barcelona, Real Madrid, Liverpool, and Arsenal. You would think maybe those are the 4 games that they lost, but they have lost to Bournemouth, Brighton, Sporting, who, don't get me wrong, are a good team, but Manchester City should be beating, and Tottenham Hotspur. Granted, Tottenham sometimes have Manchester City's number, but still, they should be beating them. So you pair these losses where Pep Guardiola has tried something new and it just didn't work against teams that he should be beating, with the fact that this guy's been here a really long time, maybe he's running out of ideas. Why isn't he able to make these teams work with the players that he has at his disposal? Jurgen Klopp won the Premier League with Jordan Henderson at the center midfield position. You're telling me you can't do it with Kovacic and Phil Foden and Gundogan? Do you see what I'm saying here? And I'm not gonna be one to say that Pep Guardiola is washed, because he very well, like I said earlier, could just turn everything around and win every single game for the rest of the season. But at this very moment, it feels like maybe, just maybe, Guardiola's out of ideas. But nonetheless, it's gonna be very interesting to see what happens to City for the rest of the season. I'm still in the opinion that they're probably gonna end up winning the Premier League, because this is just what they do every single time, and I'm tired of seeing it, and I'm already traumatized, so I'm just gonna not even pretend that they're absolutely done. But of course, time will tell. All I know is that above everything else, or whatever happens this season, at the end of the day, Pep Guardiola is going to be continuing to be bald for the rest of the campaign.